As we get set up for the screen, I wanted to thank Paulo for that talk. It sets up a great overview. I'm going to be drilling into something far more specific, but I'm glad that the umbrella is there. My name is Michael Grace, and I'm a very proud alumnus of the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology. Finished up here a couple of years ago, and it's great to be back. The subject of my talk is the Order of Malta as an ecclesial movement, and then also as a part two to talk a little bit about co-responsibility and what we can learn from the experience of the Order of Malta over the last 900 years for some insights into co-responsibility. I'll start out with the name of the order, the Sovereign Military Hospitaller Order of St. John of Jerusalem, of Rhodes, and of Malta. That's called a mouthful, and that's why we call ourselves the Order of Malta. But those words are important because they reflect something about who we are. Let me deal with the names of the cities first. Those are not the cities in which the order was victorious. Those are the cities in which we got kicked out. The order was founded in the late 11th century as an order of religious brothers. There were no knights, there were no swords. We were putting together essentially a hospice or a hospital or a hotel, whatever term you want to use, for pilgrims who were coming to the Holy Land, who had lost everything they had, who had walked for months and were sick. And there was a need for these people on the street to have a place to go. And how do we do that? That's the mouthful. We start out in the 11th century focusing on a need, and I think that's an important part for these, the ecumenical, the ecclesiastical movements that we're talking about. They all seem to focus on a need. Here, the need that Blessed Gerard saw was misery. And in fact, one of the questions that he asked his brothers was, will our group even continue on in life? And his response to them was, our fraternity will last forever because the soil in which it is rooted is the misery of the world. And if it should please God, there will always be those who will labor to reduce suffering and make the misery of the world more endurable. That has been our vocation from the beginning, and we're going to go through now a very quick summary of 900 years to see how that has changed over the time. But recall, to start out, we're a group of male religious nurses accompanied by a group of women who were also nurses with a parallel hospital in the center of Jerusalem, serving pilgrims from all faiths without regard to color, without regard to religion. The property that we got actually was donated by the Muslim caliph at the time because we had been willing to open our doors to everybody. This is a begging order, although you might not think of the Order of Malta that way. It has become military because what happened in the Holy Land was those pilgrims needed to have escorts to go back home. They needed escorts to come to Jerusalem to focus on their pilgrimage. And so a military function ended up developing in order to prevent harm. And that ended up being a very significant part for the order. As the order ended up taking more and more of a military role to defend churches, to defend pilgrims, the knights who came in, who had come with the First Crusade, liked what they saw and wanted to be part of this movement. Noble families started supporting this order, and it allowed them to continue on with a measure of independence that a lot of the other ecclesial movements at the time, to use that term, did not possess. So for example, the Franciscans relatively quickly became a clerically led order. The Order of St. John of Jerusalem did not. And I asked myself, why was that? What is the decisive difference that caused this order not to become clerically led? And I think the reason that there was an institution there that was able to communicate with and at times push back from efforts by the clergy to control the order so that the mission would always remain directly focused on the misery of the poor and alleviating that. That institution, that office, were the noble families at the time that had the means and the education and also the organization through generations in order to keep focused on the mission of the order. The order was born on the periphery in Jerusalem, the periphery of Europe, and its works even today remain on the periphery. And by periphery, I mean in the places where nobody wants to go, on the edges of the city, right now on the border of Colombia, where there are 1 million Venezuelans desperately seeking shelter, food, education, medical care, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Turkey, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in most of the countries of Africa. The order today holds a seat in the United Nations as a permanent observer, has membership in dozens of international relief organizations, formal diplomatic relations with 109 countries, more than $3 billion in annual expenditures in support of healthcare and disaster relief. It remains the second largest landowner in Italy after the Italian Republic, and many of the fruits of that work over the centuries is what allows the work of the order to continue worldwide. And you've all heard of Henry VIII. He did a real number on the order and its assets in England, and the same thing happened with the French Revolution, because at the time of the French Revolution, the order was the second largest landowner at the time, and tremendous amounts of money went to help the poor and sick, and that was all eliminated with the revolution. Today we have 13,500 knights and dames on 6 continents, tens of thousands of employees, and no citizens. We're serving hundreds of thousands of people. And what is intriguing here is what has happened since the movement in Vatican II to make this all happen. Since the 1960s, the Order of Malta has quadrupled in size. Very interesting, considering how many religious orders since the 1960s have actually declined in size. Some of the key events that helped us to get where we are today. We started in Jerusalem, as I mentioned, with Fra Gerard, who was the Benedictine brother, who we don't know, but effectively got kicked out because he was so consumed with dealing those who were in the street that he wasn't able to stay fully consonant with the Benedictine obligations of prayer and the internal community that was there. The Crusaders arrived decades after the order had started, which again illustrates the point that we started out as a group running a hotel and a ministry for the sick. In 1113, Pope Pascal II issued a papal bull granting the protection of the Holy See for the order at the time. That was because it had been subject to taxes and tithings from the bishops and local taxation authorities, and the money that was coming in from Gerard's fundraising wanted to be committed solely to the need of the poor. This is an actual image of the original papal bull from 1113. You can see it if you go to Valletta and visit the National Museum of Malta. In trying to get to the charism of the order and how we work together, I think it's important to go back to look at who the founder was, to see what that spark of creativity was, that response to the need and the vocation of the order. The epitaph that was on the walls of the hospital in Jerusalem refers to Gerard as the most humble man in the East, servant of the poor and kind to strangers, ordinary in appearance, but a noble heart shone within him. His good qualities are proven by these buildings. He was provident in many things, acting with great care in all. He took on many different kinds of tasks. He stretched out his gifted hands to many lands. From everywhere he collected what was needed to feed his own. This illustrates really what the core of the order is, which is to identify what the needs of the poor are and the needy on the periphery, and then to go to the center, to go to the cities, to go to those who have means, and be the connecting point, the conduit between those who live in the city, those who are on the edge of the city, those who have much and those who have needs. Now, we didn't stay in we didn't stay in Jerusalem very long, about 200 years. But that ended up changing. We went from becoming a military force and escort for pilgrims and protector of fortresses to becoming a naval force. We were on the island of Rhodes for 300 years as a naval force, and then we lost that and got kicked out. We then went to the island of Malta in 1530, and we spent 270 years there until we got kicked out. I won't go through all the adventures, but there's plenty of history about the battles, the courage, the victories against all odds. With the loss of Malta, because we were a geopolitical player at the time, we ended up getting taken over, at least temporarily, by Tsar Paul I, who was non-Catholic, married, and completely violated all the rules of the order with respect to leadership at Fraz. But those were very challenging times. And we moved then to Rome in 1834, and that's where we are now. We haven't changed our name yet, so we're not the Order of Rome, we're still the Order of Malta, but that could change later on too. We'll have to see. This is the Aventine Palace, where many of our conferences are held, and it's right beside Santa Sabina, where the Dominican headquarters is. Our Fra, Grand Master, Giacomo della Torre, meeting Pope Francis for the annual meeting. And then finally, there are some images here showing the Mass at the Vatican in February of 2013, when we celebrated the 900th anniversary of the signing of the papal bull recognizing the Order of Malta. The next part that I'd like to focus on now, very briefly, is the notion of co-responsibility that comes out of this movement that has been going on for 900 years. What you see over these 900 years is a lay order of religious and laymen who are committed to use their talents, their secular gifts, toward a common goal. And it was that vision of helping the poor, those who are needy, that has been the inspiration for us to work together in a very organized team. Even though we don't bear arms now and only kill microbes, the focus, that military aspect of our order, is very important because it allows us to work together as a team to do more for the church than what we could do by ourselves. One of the aspects of the order. Now, when I think about what insights the Order of Malta might offer in this conversation about co-responsibility, the central point here is that there was a movement early on that arose autonomously, not in opposition to the clergy, but in partnership with it. There was a mission that the lay religious were running, and the priests, the clergy, were in partnership with us to help support that. One of the ways we describe that is we minister to the poor and sick, and the clergy in the order minister to us. The governance of the order has always been by the lay religious and not the clergy in the order, because we've had the issues of military force, we've had governance issues that require things that would be difficult for clerical members to be involved in, such as bearing weapons. Now, this root of co-responsibility that we've been discussing this weekend, I think can go back, if one looks, even back to the early church, where we see something like the Council of Jerusalem. The key issue of who belongs to the church. And there we don't see a top-down approach being taken. We see a very inclusive approach where Peter was there presiding over a discussion with witnesses, with theologians in the making, talking about what our Lord would do, how our Lord should handle this problem of the Holy Spirit being evidenced among the Gentiles. That co-responsibility showing not just a collaboration, but a true ownership by the lay people as well as by the hierarchy is what allowed that decision, that really critical decision for the early church, to turn out as well as it did, and for most of us to be here today. The co-responsibility unites the laity and the hierarchy through that authority of community and the authority of structure in keeping with Congar's ecclesiology. On the Vatican II documents, I took a look, a word search there, and I saw a lot of collaboration, that emphasis of working together. And that's an important advance. What I didn't see so much was the use of the term co-responsibility. And so I did some more looking at that to see what co-responsible might actually mean. It's not a recognized word in English. In French, co-responsable means one who shares one or more responsibilities with one or more persons. Now that's almost a useless definition. It's there, but what does it really mean? It's not what we would call joint and several liability in the Anglo-Saxon context. What that means is both of you, parties, are responsible for the entirety. Co-responsible means something different. And what I'd invite us to think about in this discussion is co-responsibility as being responsible to the other person, the other party, but also being responsible to the relationship as a whole. You have obligations toward the success of the relationship and the success of the other party in the relationship. That has some important implications for the laity and the clergy working together. It's more than collaboration. It's not parallel play. We have one unity. We have one mission, which is the church that we talked about yesterday. But we approach it and have different roles because of the different talents that we have, that we possess in responding to that call. This was also fleshed out in Christi Fidelis Laity. But again, the word co-responsible has to be inferred in there. The word itself is not used. But Pope Benedict in May 2009 did use it. And I'd like to read you a homily that he gave as a closing here, a homily that he gave to the priests in Rome as the Bishop of Rome, not the Pope, but as the Bishop of Rome. To what extent is the pastoral co-responsibility of all, and particularly of the laity, recognized and encouraged? There is still a long way to go. Too many of the baptized do not feel part of the ecclesial community and live on its margins. What paths can we take? In the first place, we must renew our efforts for a formation which is more attentive and focused on the vision of the church, both on the part of priests as well as of religious and lay people. At the same time, it is necessary to improve pastoral structures in such a way that the co-responsibility of all members of the people of God in their entirety is gradually promoted, with respect for vocations and for the respective roles of the consecrated and of lay people. This demands a change in the mindset of the clergy, particularly concerning lay people. They must no longer be viewed as collaborators of the clergy, but truly recognized as co-responsible for the church's being in action, thereby fostering the consolidation of a mature and committed laity. This common awareness of being church, of all the baptized, in no way diminishes the responsibility of parish priests. In fact, it increases that responsibility. This is not easy work for parish priests and for clergy in general to allow that flowering of lay co-responsibility. And final thought on this, we have been troubled by the scandals of this past year and of 2002, and it has been a grieving experience for lay people as well. There might be a tendency to say, just to blame the clergy. There you go again. Why didn't you take care of it? It's your fault. And I think that's the wrong approach for us to be taking. As co-responsible laity, we have to accept our responsibility also for not being present, for not being as supportive of the clergy as we should have been, and to take our ownership of that problem. We belong as a unity, and I think when we recognize that we are each co-responsible, more than collaborating, but co-responsible, we can really turn the corner here and start to see the vision of the full church. Thank you.